Bonjour à toutes et à tous et bienvenue à Ottawa. I am Jennifer Irish, Director of the University of Ottawa Information Integrity Lab, and I'm delighted to open the Summit on Climate Disinformation. Permit me first to pay respect to the Algonquin people who are the traditional guardians of this land. Nous reconnaissons le lien sacré des langues, dates, l'unisson à ce territoire qui demeure non cédé. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and future. Permit me now to reflect on the journey that brought us here. The Information Integrity Lab was established 3 years ago as a hub for innovation, knowledge leadership, and exchange, advancing both information integrity and the countering of information distortion. The priorities in the mission are clear: to safeguard democratic resilience, national and international security, public health, and of course, climate action. Indeed, climate change is the existential challenge of our time, and climate disinformation cuts across every one of the other priorities I've just referenced. Our work in this space has been made possible by the Trottier Family Foundation, represented here by their CEO, whose deep commitment to bold climate action in Canada supports research, policies, and partnerships for a sustainable net zero future. Thanks to their support, and also that of UNESCO, who's represented here as well, we've sustained a 3-year program of applied research, narrative analysis, coalition building, and technology development. And that is the program which enjoys an inflection point here today at this summit. Along the way, we have confronted the challenge of communicating science in an age of disinformation, convened more than 100 organizations across Canada and others having global reach to share findings and map the landscape of climate narratives. We've explored the disruptive power of AI-driven and visual disinformation in partnership with CRIM of Montreal, and we'll be seeing some of their technologies at the end of our program today, and examine the nexus of climate change, Arctic security, and geopolitical competition with the support also of the Department of National Defense's MINDS program. Our gatherings have produced major publications, practical tools, and most importantly, a growing coalition of activists, researchers, practitioners, and technologists committed to this work. We have joined forces with international partners because information integrity is climate action, and it knows no borders. Without trusted information, evidence cannot guide decisions, urgency becomes noise, and progress is delayed. Our track has coincided at a time when science, the information ecosystem, and the natural ecosystem are all threatened. I was privileged to have been involved in the negotiation of the UN Framework Convention of Climate Change and also the Kyoto Protocol. Climate action was urgently needed then. In the decades first, the evidence has only further mounted and is everywhere. The signals are unmistakable. But disinformation and the increasing complexity of how information is distorted scrambles those signals. Urgency is turned into noise. And so we arrive at this summit. Here we aim not only to showcase technologies, tools, and practices that can make a difference, but to shape policy in Canada and globally. We aspire to consolidate a coalition of the willing, one that can sustain momentum long after this gathering ends. This is our moment to act, to align science, technology, and society, to advance information integrity in the service of climate action, and to build the resiliency of our planet and our democracies, which is so urgently needed. And now a word from our sponsors. The Information Integrity Lab is housed and has been subsidized by the University of Ottawa Professional Development Institute, which offers professional development opportunities to thousands of private sector leaders and government policymakers. Serge Blais is its energetic executive director and an early architect and supporter of the lab. And c'est avec beaucoup de plaisir de présenter Serge Blais afin de souligner la contribution de l'Institut et aussi de la Fondation Trottier. Serge.
Bonjour à tous. D'abord, tous et toutes, pour d'être ici pour contribuer à la conversation sur cet enjeu des plus conséquents de notre époque, probablement. I'm thrilled and honored to present Mr. Karel Mayrand, the brand new CEO of the Trottier Family Foundation. Mr. Mayrand has been appointed to the Trottier Foundation just a month ago, in August, right? I'm sure he is extremely busy as he's just now taking charge of this very important and influential foundation. One of the largest in Canada, actually. And yet he took time to be with us here today from Montreal to participate in this important summit. Mr. Mayrand has been recognized across Canada and internationally for his leadership and vision throughout his 25 years in philanthropy and in the area of environment broadly defined. M. Mayrand a dédié toute une carrière professionnelle à la science climatique et dans divers postes importants. Auteur de plusieurs livres, il est aussi bien connu comme commentateur sur les enjeux climatiques et autres grands enjeux de société. His nomination as CEO of the Trottier Foundation will ensure that this transformative philanthropic organization will thrive well into the future and continue to generate significant and concrete impacts. The University of Ottawa received a generous grant of $600,000 from the Trottier Family Foundation. I don't know if you knew that, but we'd like another one. It not only funds the work that we do on climate disinformation, but actually has allowed us to set up the Information Integrity Lab 3 years ago. It has allowed us to build methodologies and tools that will serve well into the future, and not only on climate, but also in areas around public health, education, and science in general. J'en profite pour souligner la présence aussi de Jean-Patrick Toussaint, qui est un fier allié de la Fondation Trottier et qui a travaillé directement avec nous, et si je peux ajouter, un fier diplômé de l'Université d'Ottawa, n'est-ce pas? Okay, voilà. Alors, M. Mayrand, félicitations pour votre nomination. D'abord, we share with you a sense of urgency in addressing climate change, climate action, and are committed to create impact through our work on the mitigation of climate mis and disinformation. Merci à la Fondation Trottier. Merci à vous, M. Mayrand, pour votre présence ici ce matin, et je vous passe la parole. Merci.
C'est ma première, allocution, ma première présence publique au nom de la Fondation familiale Trottier. Donc, j'arrive ici avec beaucoup d'humilité, puis des notes écrites. Je veux aussi remercier Jean-Patrick d'avoir investi autant d'efforts, puis d'avoir appuyé cet événement-là pour moi. En fait, peu de gens savent que je suis un diplômé de sciences politiques, puis ma spécialité à l'époque, c'était l'Europe de l'Est puis l'Union soviétique. So, believe me, I know something about disinformation. And I'm very, very worried, not to say scared, about what I'm seeing now. And I've been fighting this fight for over 25 years now, facing arguments, bogus, fake arguments, disinformation, alternative facts, and all of this. Those of us who work on climate change have been facing this, well before we saw it happen in, kind of every sphere of society. So this is a very important moment. The Trottier Family Foundation has, from its inception, been committed to creating meaningful impact in Canada across science, health, education, environment, and climate. We believe strongly in following science, basing decisions on evidence, rigorous research, innovation. Science tells us that we must act now to limit the worst impact of climate change. And, I hate to read that line because I've been saying this for almost 30 years now, and it's all been, deny, delay, deceive, the strategies that prevented us from acting. So my understanding is that kind of the barrier to action, probably the most important barrier to action is not technology, and it's not economics. It's disinformation itself. It's the fact that we cannot have a political dialogue that leads to action and that allows technology to be scaled, solutions to be scaled, implemented. So we must act now, and there's an urgency, and the Trottier Family Foundation to recognize this emergency or urgency has committed to granting 150 million in a decade, that decade that will end in 2030. And part of that granting is to partner with University of Ottawa's Information Integrity Lab with this grant of 600,000 that we just referred to, that supports different things, but this event today. This summit, I cannot say enough how this summit is timely and necessary. Misinformation and disinformation around climate issues has the potential to derail public understanding. It has done so in many ways already. Weaken policy action, sow confusion and mistrust, and these are the same tools that are also used to sow mistrust in all of our institutions, in science, vaccines, everything. And so by addressing disinformation in the context of climate change, we also, I think, we're also developing tools that will help us protect our democratic institutions and our scientific institutions. Of course, no single actor can solve this alone. Philanthropy can catalyze innovation and incubation, can take risks. Public institutions, government, academia can have the scale, the mandate, and it can develop regulation. And civil society ground us in communities and can help us build trust and values. And our foundation has the privilege of working in collaboration across all of these sectors. And that's important to us because we know that we're trying to support like an ecosystem, a response that is that is supported across the country and across sectors. And the summit is not just about diagnosing, I'm having a hard time with this word, the problem. It is also to generate concrete actions, tools, networks, commitments to reduce the harms of disinformation. And also to encourage all stakeholders here, researchers, media, governments, civil society, funders, to collaborate and share best practices, invest in trusted messengers, improve media literacy, monitor narratives, support science journalism. And it's like, philanthropy is actually kind of late to the party in that sense, because like philanthropic organizations, foundations very often consider that these issues are too political and hence won't kind of approach them. But what they don't see is that if we don't protect the very institutions, the facts, the science that we need to make changes and to support, the changes we want to see in society, if we don't support that infrastructure first, then we lose all the means we need to get the changes we want to see in the world. So I think philanthropy is starting to understand that it needs to react to protect all the institutions that support democracy. So on a personal note, as CEO, I'm very honored to lead TFF, honored and humbled, and I kind of feel a lot of pressure to lead TFF. I said DSF. Did I say DSF? Sorry. Because JP, Dale, and I used to work for the David Suzuki Foundation at the same time. That's it. We're out of the closet now. Closet radical environmentalists. So it's very challenging to and I'm honored to lead the TFF at the time where stakes could not be higher. Our children, communities, ecosystems depend on us getting this right, because we're human beings and we create the world we live in. I have been involved in the broader climate movement for over 3 decades now, and I know firsthand how fragile our climate policy gains are. And how vital it is to ensure that we address the issue of disinformation and misinformation. 2 decades ago, we had the challenge of climate deniers. Then we had to curb the negative impact of climate delayers. Now we have to address both battlefronts as misinformation and disinformation amplify the deniers, the delayers, the deceivers, all of these. TFF remains committed to supporting not only what science say, but how people understand it, how public discourse is shaped, and ensuring that truth, transparency, integrity is at the core of climate conversation. So I'm coming here to learn. I'm very excited. I'm spending the 2 days here because, again, I'm a political scientist by training, and I want to get things, I want to solve this issue. And so I'm very, very happy to be with you today. Thank you.
Well, merci beaucoup, Monsieur Mayrand, for not only your support that's made this summit and this coalition possible, but also for your important words of wisdom for us. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the Canadian Commission to UNESCO for its contribution and to recognize the presence here of Elaine Young. Merci beaucoup, Elaine. UNESCO is doing great work with respect to the global initiative on information integrity and climate change. And we'll be hearing more about that tomorrow when we have speakers coming in from the United Nations joining us at our opening for day 2. It is now my sincere honor and privilege to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. This is where, through the magic of technology, I point to the screen and hope that she magically pops up from Texas. She launched our cycle last October, and so much has happened since with respect to information integrity, the battle of science, and in the climate change domain since. Dr. Katharine Hayhoe is an atmospheric scientist whose research focuses on understanding the impacts of climate change on people and the planet. She is the chief scientist for Nature United and a distinguished professor and endowed chair at Texas Tech University. I underscored that she is a Canadian, though, and she's received numerous awards and recognitions for her work, well merited, including being named as one of Time 100 most influential people and a United Nations champion of the Earth. And just a passionate believer in the importance of science communication. So, Dr. Hayhoe, we very much look forward to your address here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It is such a pleasure to be with you virtually. Spend some time with a few of you yesterday, hopefully see a few of you at Climate Week in New York next week, and to address an issue that, as has already been noted, is becoming more and more important over time. So last year, when this whole process kicked off, we talked about why misinformation is so critical and how it's been spreading over time. But today, I've been asked more specifically to address the urgency of why we need to act on climate misinformation and disinformation. Now, you know, as well as I do, that the primary difference between those is whether the person sharing it knows that they're doing so deliberately or not. Often people share information that they are not sure whether it's true, or they don't even know if it's true or not. But we also know that there are many people who are deliberately sharing information they know is not true. So false information in general, regardless of the motive of the person sharing it, is a critical and growing issue. And here's why it's so important. So I am a physical scientist. I'm an atmospheric scientist. I specifically study how climate change affects our lives, how the decisions that we make today will determine our future. And this is what led me to my interest in and my concern with communication and mis and disinformation, because these are some of the biggest barriers standing in the way of people making the effective science and fact-based decisions they need to today to ensure a better future tomorrow. It is no longer an issue of we don't have the technology, or it's too expensive, or we don't know what to do. We have almost everything we need. We know almost everything we need to do. And we certainly have enough to do now while we're figuring out the little bits that we need to in the future. We're not doing it because we don't understand why it's so important and why we have to act now. If we look at the science, though, the science is crystal clear. The warming that we are seeing today is unprecedented in human history. Every aspect of our infrastructure and economy was built for a planet that no longer exists. We often talk about this issue in terms of global warming because we scientists use the average temperature of the planet to track what's happening. It's a handy metric. But often how we are being affected as individuals in the places where we live is more like global weirding. Climate change is loading the weather dice against us, making droughts more intense, heat waves more frequent and more dangerous, wildfires to burn greater area, storms to be much stronger and dump more rain on us. Wherever we look, we see that our records are falling daily. Heat records, air temperature, ocean temperature. Our wildfire seasons in Canada are breaking record after record. We're dangerously close to the threshold set in the Paris Agreement, which is not a scientific threshold, because what the science says is every bit of warming matters. And for some people, they've already reached very dangerous levels of warming today. But 10 years ago, the world came together and decided to do everything it could to limit warming to at least 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees if necessary, because we know that the hotter it gets, the greater the risk of irreversible impacts on people and the planet. When we look farther back in time, people often say, well, it's been warmer before, so why does this matter? The further back in time we look, the more concerning what's happening is. We have never seen temperatures changing this fast. In fact, 55 million years ago, which is the most recent time of rapid warming after today, our best estimate is that about 1/10 of the carbon that we humans produce every year was naturally going into the atmosphere to warm the planet at that time. So it's no exaggeration to say that we are conducting an unprecedented experiment with our only home. People often talk about saving the planet, but even this phrasing introduces psychological distance as if we could somehow orbit around in outer space without the resources this planet provides. Since we last spoke over the last year, more and more studies have been coming out clearly showing how it is not just about saving the planet. The direct and indirect health impacts of climate change through heat, pollution, extreme weather events, losses and contamination of water, food losses, decrease in the nutritional content of food, even the impacts on people's mental health. It's very clear this is not about saving the planet. This is quite literally about saving us. And when I say saving us, I put an asterisk on there. You can see that. Because I want to be very clear, it is about all of us living things on this planet. Where does the oxygen we breathe come from? Take a breath. Some of that came from tiny phytoplankton in the ocean. Some of it came from kelp. Some of it came from trees. Where does the food we eat come from? The water we drink? The resources that we use to make everything we have, it all comes from nature. We depend on nature. It doesn't need us. We need it. So given this incredible urgency, given the fact that whoever we are, we have every reason to care about climate change if we simply live on planet Earth, which to my knowledge we all do, why is the world not responding quickly enough? Because we are not. There's a huge emissions gap in new climate pledges, and actually right after this, I have to prepare my presentation for next week when I'm speaking to the heads of state and the ministers from around the world who are presenting their new nationally determined contributions to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And I've been asked in 3 minutes, not 30 minutes, to tell them why it's so urgent that we have to up our commitments. Why is it that we aren't doing this? It just makes sense, doesn't it? Well, often people assume that it's because not enough people are worried about climate change. But when we look at data, I'm a big fan of data as a scientist, we see that that's not true. Around the world, the majority of people in most countries are worried about climate change. Any country here that's pink is over 60%, and the darker pink it is, the more people are worried. A study this past year around the world found that 80% of people around the world want their country to do more on climate change. 80%. And 53% of people around the world are more worried about climate change this year than they were last year. So it's not a case of, again, we don't have the technology. It's not a case of we don't know what to do. It's not a case of we don't have the science clearly indicating that we have to act. And it isn't even a case that people aren't worried, because they are. So what's going on? Well, we know that worry isn't enough. And this is another key finding of social science. Even to today, I run into somebody every day who thinks worry is enough. But it's very clear from the data that worry is not enough. In fact, this is a study from ECCC last year, illustrating how there is a direct correlation between whether people are willing to act, that's the axis on the left, and whether people think it makes a difference, that's the axis on the right. This is a term called efficacy that was coined by a Stanford psychologist, Albert Bandura, in 1972. And it is simply the concept of, if I do something, do I think it will make a difference? And I know this is going to sound really shocking, but if people don't think what they do will make a difference, then they're not willing to act. And here's the connection to climate change. How am I, just think of yourself personally as an individual, how am I going to stop the wildfires raging across our country? How am I going to stop the ocean circulation from slowing down? How am I going to rescue even a single polar bear from starving to death? I'm not. And so the worse it gets, the more our efficacy tanks. And we have data on this. Here's just one example. Now, cast your eye down to, at the very bottom, you see there's March 2023 and September 2023. What happened between March and September 2023 in Canada? That was our worst wildfire season on record, right? So you would expect, given conventional wisdom, that the worse things are, the more worried people are. You would expect the people who say environment is a top issue facing our country to jump. And it jumped a little bit, and then what happened after that? What happened after that is exactly what I would expect, and what most social scientists would expect, which is it went down. Why did it go down? Lack of efficacy. How am I supposed to stop the wildfires? Even today, we have people south of the border saying, take a rake. I'm like, let me give you a guided tour of just one tiny little part of our vast forests. You take a rake and see what you can do about it. We don't feel like there's anything we can do. So when it comes to the barriers standing in our way of climate action, it isn't what I think of as the head. Most people are worried. Most people understand it's real, it's human caused, and it's serious. Most people get that. But we haven't made the head to heart connection. We don't understand how it affects my life. In Canada, one of the biggest issues in our last election was the price of housing and the price of food, the cost of living. We don't understand that that is already being directly impacted by climate change. My own home insurance, where I live in the US, went up 50% last year due to extreme weather events that are being supersized by climate change. We haven't made the head to heart connection, and we have not made the heart to hands connection. Now, I don't have the data for Canada, but for the US, the data tends to show similar trends, just a bit lower. And in the US, 2/3 of people are worried about climate change in the US, but only 8% are activated. That means there's almost 60% of people in the US who are worried in their heads, but they haven't connected that to their hands. 60%. Why not? It's because we don't understand how it matters to us, and we don't understand what we can do about it. And just at a time when we need this information more than ever, we are being inundated by what? By misinformation and by disinformation. Now, when I spoke last year, and if you missed that, there is a recording, you can watch it. Most of what I said is completely different, but this is a figure I showed last year, and then I updated it this year, and it looks the same. Every year, the World Economic Forum asks industry leaders, what are the greatest global risks that you believe are confronting people around the world? They are not asking academics. They are not asking researchers. They're not asking environmentalists. They're not asking David Suzuki. They're asking industry leaders. And industry leaders are highlighting misinformation and disinformation and extreme weather events, which, as I just highlighted, are getting significantly worse thanks to climate change, as the greatest global risks confronting people today. And these are becoming increasingly intertwined. Now, first of all, don't get me wrong. Humans have always been susceptible to false information. Studies have shown that there's something about the way our brains are wired that we just want to share information that provokes interest, outrage, it's juicy, or it's surprising. We're just wired that way, and misinformation is something we've always been susceptible to. But it is getting worse. Why is it getting worse? Well, I don't know if you had this experience, but for myself, growing up in Toronto back in the 1980s, I vividly remember growing up in church circles. I vividly remember long, many times mimeographed and folded papers being passed around, sharing how, the stars and moon symbol of a certain company that makes a certain toothpaste was actually a satanic symbol, or, crazy claims like that had been photocopied and mailed, and then photocopied and mailed and photocopied and mailed. You get my point, right? Well, today, they don't have to be photocopied and mailed. They can just be put online, and in a few seconds, they are around the world. And so now we have the tools that allow false information to spread like wildfire around the world. And studies have shown, for example, on the old Twitter, I would put money on this being even more today, but even on the old Twitter, false information spread 6 times faster than accurate information. 6 times faster. And that was the old Twitter. So we've got the tools now that can spread false information just like this. And our brains are more susceptible to false information. 2 recent studies have come out just this year showing that when people share information online, 75% of the time they don't even click on the link that they're sharing, number one. And the links that are shared most often are the ones that provoke outrage and are more likely to be false than true. So that's bad news number 1. Here's number 2. Not only do we have the tools, we have the algorithms that amplify false information and that amplify niche voices and that suppress accurate information. So they suppress accurate information, they amplify false information, and they amplify niche voices. Let's talk about each one of those. First of all, the niche voices, a study done by my colleague Ashley Landrum about 8 or 9 years ago, found that pretty much one guy sitting in his mother's basement in the US West Coast making flat earther videos, which were then amplified by YouTube's algorithm, was responsible for the spread of flat eartherism around the world. The YouTube algorithm amplified niche voices to basically create this resurgence of flat earthism. The algorithms were not programmed maliciously per se, they were just trying to make money. But the thing is, what they make money on is what people watch the most, and what people watch the most is stuff that surprises you or provokes outrage and is more often likely to be false than true. So even just a purely economic algorithm tends to be slanted towards, or disproportionately, I should say, slanted towards information that is not as true compared to information that is true. Then, though, we have the problem that the algorithms are being designed and set. So if you follow me on Blue Sky, you know that I like to do a lot of comparisons of social media. I've been on social media since 2009. That was when I joined Twitter. For many years, I was the most followed climate scientist on Twitter. But I noticed a massive difference in Twitter after it was, first of all, purchased by Elon Musk, and second of all, after the US elections. So I have posts that I share. Let's see if I have a copy of the post. Just a second. No, I thought I had a copy of the post. I have posts that I share, and I'll just tell you what it is. The post is, climate change is real, it's us, it's serious, and there are solutions if we act now. That's the post. So I've shared that post multiple times across multiple platforms over a lot of time. And what I noticed, first of all, on Twitter, is that the amount of trolling increased. Now, this is likes and shares and comments. If you only looked at the comments, the amount of negative trolling increased by a factor of 10 to 15 times. 10 to 15 times the negative trolling comments between 2019 and 2022. And it wasn't just on this post. I looked at multiple posts. And the negative comments were really awful. Everything from disinformation, misinformation, calling me names, telling me to kill myself, just horrible, horrible stuff. So first of all, the trolling increased massively due to algorithm changes. And then the interactions plummeted, as you can see here. But my interactions on Facebook had already plummeted because in 2018, Facebook determined that climate change and clean energy were politicized topics. And my account began to be shadow banned, where all of a sudden people couldn't see my posts, they couldn't interact with my posts, my following, which had been increasing exponentially, froze. And that was an algorithm change, and it happened in 2018. Now, recently, this past 2 years, there's been 2 brand new platforms that have come in to sort of challenge X in terms of microblogging. And the 2 new microblogging platforms are Threads and Blue Sky. So what I noticed was that before the US election, Threads was actually much more interactive than Blue Sky, which doesn't really have an algorithm. Threads has an algorithm, a very strong algorithm. Oh my gosh. One time I hearted a post on Threads about somebody's cat that died. Oh no. That was a terrible mistake. Every time I opened my phone, there were dozens of posts about people's pets who had died. It was horrible. I had to reprogram my algorithm by rigorously unliking and liking things to fix that. So Threads has a very strong algorithm that reacts extremely sensitively to anything the user does, but also to anything the operator does, whereas Blue Sky basically has no algorithm. You have to subscribe to lists and feeds to get the content you want. So before the US election, Threads was much more interactive than Blue Sky for the same number of followers. This is normalized per 1,000 followers, but I had the same number of followers. My accounts were growing equally. After the US election, Blue Sky was exactly the same, and Threads tanked. In fact, my account froze and it stopped growing. And so now I have 6 times more followers on Blue Sky than Threads in the period of a year, even though they were growing neck and neck until the US election. So this is a personal example of how algorithm changes can actually affect the spreading of accurate information. So not only was there more bad information, like on Twitter, all the misinformation that's been happening, but the good information isn't being spread either. All right, so those are only 2. We've got the tools, we've got the algorithms, then we've got the actors who are commercializing and even weaponizing false information. And lastly, now we have AI to make, now I want to be very clear, to make false information better quality so it's more deceptive. I don't mean it's making the situation better, it's making the situation worse, but it's making it worse by making more convincing false information, and it's making it faster, and it's doing so both accidentally and deliberately. How is it doing so accidentally? Well, the other day, I went to Google, and I have to turn off the AI on Google. You can do that, and I need to do that, because I was searching for something, and a thing popped up at the top for what I was searching for, and it turns out that Google's AI now thinks that Leah Stokes and I are the same person. Leah is a political scientist from Huntsville, Ontario, so we're very close together. We both study climate change. She's in California, I'm in Texas. We're not the same person. We're great friends and colleagues, but now AI thinks that we're the same person. But on Twitter, on X, they now have Grok. And this is something, for example, that Grok is doing. It's spreading false information. There's a range of opinions. Some people believe this, other people believe that. it's actually causing more muddying of the waters rather than less. So before I talk about what we're going to do, I'm just going to let you know we have time for a couple of questions at the end. So if you want to ask a question, take out your phone. If you haven't already turned off the ringer, go ahead and turn off the ringer now. Take out your phone, take a picture of this QR code, or you can go to pollev.com/Katharine. That is POLLEV.com/KATHARINE. You have to spell it right. If you haven't had your coffee yet, just take a picture of the QR code. And when you do that, you'll see a page that looks like this where you can ask a question, and even more fun, you can upvote someone else's question. So you have a couple of minutes here to enter a question and look at the other questions people are asking and give it a thumbs up if you like it, and I will answer a couple of questions at the end that will look like this. But let me pivot now to talk about what we can do. What can we do in the face of the tools, the algorithms, the actors, and the AI? What can we do? Well, first of all, there is significant research coming out in the last couple of years that shows that what they call pre-bunking or inoculation, isn't that amazing? Psychological inoculation, just like a vaccine, improves resilience against misinformation. Researchers behind the Inoculation Science Project that was led by Sander van der Linden at Cambridge University found that they literally compare it to vaccine. By giving people a microdose of misinformation and debunking it, so here it is and here's why it's not true, it helps prevent them from falling for it in the future. And I actually did a study on this 10 years ago where I taught students at my university in Texas with my PhD student, John McEwen. I taught students accurate facts about climate change, and we did it two ways. The first way, we just taught them the straight facts. The second way, we said, you might have heard blah, 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 but here's why it's not true. You might have thought blah, 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 but here's why it's not true. So we did two different ways, one just the straight facts and one the you might have heard, you might have thought. And then we tested them afterwards right away. And then we tested them several weeks later to see if they learned more and if they retained more. And guess what we found 10 years ago? We found that with these microdoses of misinformation, they learned more and they retained more. So it's not just about education, it's about all of us, the way our brains work. And when we share accurate information and when we debunk in microdoses false information, what does that look like? Well, research at Yale University shows us what that looks like. If you were listening carefully, you might have heard me say that when we talk about misinformation, it's typically, it's not real, it's not us, it's not bad, we can't fix it, it's too late. And people don't agree. Those are the main categories of misinformation. The researchers at Yale have reframed this as the categories of truths that people need to know. What do people need to know? For a long time, we've known people need to know it's real, it's us, and it's bad. But we now know, thanks to social science, this isn't enough. It's enough to activate the head, but not the heart and the hands. What do we need to activate the heart and the hands? We need to know experts agree, others care, and there's hope. That's what we need to know. So specifically on these last two, others care and there's hope. A study that came out last year found that 69% of people around the world were willing to contribute 1% of their personal income, 86% endorse pro-climate social norms, and 89% want more political action. Others care is factual, but most people don't know it. And remember, we saw this figure. What about willingness to act? If we think it makes a difference. If we think it makes a difference, what's another word for think? Hope. If we have hope that what we do will make a difference, we're willing to act. So what do we need to do in our communication? In addition to pre-bunking or inoculating, we need to help people connect the head to the heart to the hands. The head is important, but it's not enough. We need a heart connection and we need to understand what we can do to make a difference. This is the equation for climate action. In the words of Greta Thunberg, the one thing we need more than hope is action. Because once we start to act, hope is all around us. So that's why every week I have a newsletter called Talking Climate. You can find it online at talkingclimate.ca, or you can just take a picture of the QR code. And every week on Talking Climate, because of the science showing that we need head, heart, and hands, every week I share good news about climate solutions that are already happening today. I share not so good news about a way that climate change is affecting us, fertility rates, coffee and bananas, senior citizens. And then I share something concrete that people can do to make a difference. Heart and hands. So the bottom line is that last green bar, hope, it's not wishful thinking. Hope is what gives us the courage to act. A better future is what's at stake for ourselves, for our children, for the next generation. And this is why confronting climate misinformation and disinformation is so urgent. We cannot afford to give up, because what's at stake is everything that matters to us. Thank you. Okay, we have great questions, and you have upvoted some of them, so we're going to do a quick rapid fire of questions here. Are you guys ready? Number 1, misinformation, disinformation, and carbon majors. Well, I'm sorry to say that carbon majors are the primary investors in mis and disinformation. And there is an excellent book and documentary called Merchants of Doubt that explains how this was done in the United States. But I am even more sorry to say that this happened in Canada too. And there's a more recent, also excellent book called The Petroleum Papers that talks about how this has been done in Canada. So if you have not yet read or watched Merchants of Doubt, put that on your calendar for this weekend. And if you have not yet read The Petroleum Papers, add that to your library list today. I highly recommend both of those books to answer this first question. Given the tech bros and the infrastructures and the world leaders, how do we address their massive influence? This is a huge issue. It's one that the EU is confronting from a government perspective. It's one that I believe we need to consider very strongly here in Canada as well. The fact that non-government actors now have enormous influence over the content, to the point where even I saw Elon Musk arguing with Grok and publicly stating that it would be, quote, fixed because it didn't agree with him when it was factually summarizing some information. This is a huge issue that needs to be addressed from a perspective of the future of human society as we know it. How do we combat it at the population level rather than with individual interventions? I think it is possible to do at a larger scale thanks to our tools. So remember, the first reason misinformation is spreading so fast is because we have these tools. But tools can be used for good or for bad. Tools are currently slanted against us to a greater or lesser degree. X, I would say the most. Meta products, the second most. YouTube's there in the middle with LinkedIn. Blue Sky's the least. We can use tools. And I believe that we need communication campaigns at scale like we've never seen before. We have never seen scaled communication campaigns, and you have several experts who are going to be speaking to you today and tomorrow about how we can do this. I am absolutely convinced that we need scaled communication campaigns that employ the best available science to inoculate people against misinformation and to share the 6 truths. It's real, it's us, it's serious, experts agree, others care, and there's hope, by connecting the head, heart, and hands with compelling personal narratives that help people see how who they are is the perfect person to care and the perfect person to act. So I think that's probably a good place to end. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for caring about this issue, for thinking about this issue, for working about this issue. And just always remember, when it's darkest and most discouraging, we're not alone, others care, and there is hope because what we do does make a difference. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hayhoe, for your powerful words and message, and also for ending with the message of hope. I find working through misinformation, disinformation, we can sometimes find ourselves in a dark place, given how pervasive these issues are, how daunting is the task. And so thank you for ending on a note of optimism, and hopefully that will carry us through for the rest of the summit. Join me again in thanking Dr. Hayhoe for her generous donation of her time and her wisdom today.